The norm this year for Georgia was more the sluggish offense, the drop passes, the lack of a running game, and that showed up again in the game against Notre Dame. Joel Klatt from Fox said that, and it's exactly what we told y'all on riding home when we were walking through Bourbon Street. I'm sure it's what Matt said in his instant reaction in the stadium in the Superdome. It's kind of the summary of what happened in the Sugar Bowl against Notre Dame, microcosms of what the problems and the issues were for Georgia, especially offensively, but a little bit on the defensive side of the ball too. Everything culminated in that game against Notre Dame in the Sugar Bowl, and it's why they lost. It's a big reason why they lost, and all on top of all that, it happened while a second string quarterback was out there for his first ever start in Gunnar Stockton. And when you really think about it and you really break down what you watched in the Sugar Bowl, Gunnar Stockton played pretty well. Was he as good as Carson Beck? I don't think so. Was he was clearly not as polished, and that comes with having fewer starts in college and having a long time since you've really played significant football and known you're the guy. So all of it happened, and it happened in spite of Gunnar Stockton actually playing a little bit better than maybe I thought he would have. Right? I thought he made good decisions. I thought he didn't really put the ball in harm's way. I thought he made some accurate passes. Yeah, Georgia still lost. Ryan Curley from Dawg Post talking about the Notre Dame game, talking about Georgia's season, because that quote, and I've got a couple other things that Klatt was saying the other day that I want to discuss, but that quote specifically stood out to me because that is exactly how I felt about the Sugar Bowl. And that when you think about the drop passes, Dylan Bell dropped a couple, right? One of them being a potential touchdown or at least a potential let's get down inside the 10-yard line big type of catch. And another one was on a third down that could have made a fourth down conversion easier. Georgia ended up converting on that fourth down with a pass interference called against the guy that was guarding Lawson Lucky, so that ended up working out. Both of them for Dylan Bell, right? But still, it doesn't change the flow of an offense and the drops. The run game was bad, right? The final rushing number against Notre Dame, Georgia ended up with 62 yards. That accounts for negative 23 yards out of Stockton sacks. But still, 2.1 yards per carry. It wouldn't be that much better if you take those sack numbers out of it. So the lack of a rushing game, it was a problem for Georgia all year long. I'm going to talk about these things as we go throughout the course of the season. I'm going to, I did a season breakdown, but we're going to do a little bit more of that. And some of the other things that to me was another microcosm that Klatt didn't mention here, but he does mention at a different point. And it's that Kirby got beat in situations, and Kirby got beat in situations in this game. To me, that's something that happened this year more than we've seen it happen ever, right? Since Kirby was early on being a head coach. I just don't think we've seen Kirby lose situations as much as we did this season. We kept talking, and this is like, if Kirby gets a hold of this is, you can tell me, man, because I'd love to hear your self-evaluation. The narrative was that this season for Kirby was a great one, right? And you think about what they've got on offense, this team is just not as talented, and Georgia still won the SEC championship, and there's something certainly to be said about that. But there's this notion that was this amazing coaching job by Kirby, and I think that it was really good in a lot of spots, but there were moments like the first half against Alabama where, man, that's just not a good look for the game plan that you're going to beat like that. And it happened against Georgia Tech. It happened against Ole Miss. It happened. They just got outcoached, and they got at a certain point. There's an execution factor, and the players have to execute better. But with Kirby, I just think he got beat a few times this year, and it hurt Georgia. And it kind of is all a culmination of it. Talking about before I kind of move on to the microcosms portion of this, and I want to talk about how those microcosms affected Georgia throughout the season, which is drop passes, all of that, the things that we mentioned with the beginning from this quote from Joel Klatt. Talking about something else he said, and it's about that coaching situation. If you remember the fake punt in the fourth quarter, I believe it was it was in the fourth quarter where it's a 4th and 1, 4th and 2, something like that, or 4th and short, and Notre Dame rolls the punt formation out, and then they sub all 11 guys and they sub in. And maybe they didn't sub in all 11 guys, and that's what I'm mistaken here, but it subbed in what looked to be pretty much the entire unit for the offense to come in. Georgia gets a chance to sub. They frantically sub guys on, get a defense out there, and it ends up being a jump offside. So that play right there is not the reason Georgia lost, because there's more than one reason, and we've talked about a lot of it. But that play and that sequence there was like, man, it just didn't feel like Georgia. And so this is what Joel Klatt had to say about it. He thought that Georgia totally failed in that situation. I think Georgia failed from a coaching perspective. And what he went on to talk about was he thought Kirby shouldn't have rushed, and that defensive staff shouldn't have rushed the defense out there when Notre Dame subbed the entire unit in for the offense to go for it on fourth down. Georgia shouldn't have just subbed super fast. He said the ref would have, this is speculatory, but the ref would have taken his time and allowed Georgia to get their subs out there. That's a maybe. That's an assumption, and you can't really assume too much in these things. But, you think about what Klatt's saying, and if Georgia would have just subbed a little slower, they talked to their guy for a second, talked to a linebacker to get out, whatever their play is going to be in the situation, maybe things do change. But so they end up subbing. They end up being frantic. Riley Leonard gets up to the ball. Notre Dame's waiting for Georgia to get lined up. They're set up for this. This is something that Notre Dame planned. And Riley Leonard goes to do a hard count, and someone, I don't remember who it was, but someone for Georgia jumps off sides. And that whole play was just kind of like, man, it's one of those plays where that sums a little bit up of what happened in the game. Georgia just lost a situation and didn't execute a situation, both from a coaching and a player standpoint. So when you go through this season and you think about where the red flags were and all of that, you look at, first of all, I've got Georgia's, I'll just show it to you what I'm looking at. I will show you. I typically use this a lot to just look at the season, because you can also see numbers that remind you, but you can go in and look at the numbers. But look at this column right here. I realize I highlighted the whole column, but look at the high rusher. Only one time did someone rush for over 100 yards as an individual, and it was against UMass when Nate Frazier did it. Obviously, Etienne got close here. A couple of people got close, but this is something that was a norm for Georgia. It's something that happens for Georgia, where they have 100-yard rushers and they put up these big 100-yard games. Last year was a year that didn't seem to be as prolific rushing as it was in the past with Kendall Milton and Dejan Edwards. Well, you look here, they were able to scrunch up a few of them. Edwards 146, Edwards 118, Milton 156, Milton 104 back here, Edwards 96, and in a couple of these, both of them were close to 100, based off of my rough memory, where some of them were close to 96. So when you look at it and you compare it to last season, which was a little bit of a drop-off in the running game, this was a drastic drop-off running the football for Georgia. And in the SEC especially, it's hard to do that, and you saw that. Games that Georgia really struggled to run, against Alabama when they lost, against Ole Miss when they lost, against Notre Dame when they lost. I mean, it's right there. They didn't do a great job running the football against Georgia Tech, and they struggled, and that game went to 8 overtimes, and Georgia barely won that football game. So it's something that was a problem. It's something that you thought, hey, this is going to be even more of a problem when you think about Gunnar Stockton getting subbed in for Carson Beck, because, yes, it can open up the run game, and it did in the second half against Texas. But then there's, okay, this passing game is probably going to drop off a little bit on top of, hey, the running game, it's just not as good. So, I wonder what it would have looked like if Carson Beck was in the game. It is what it is. And Gunnar Stockton was the quarterback, and he probably is going to be the quarterback moving forward. But in this Notre Dame game, in this season, what would it have looked like if Carson Beck was the one back there slinging around? How much different would the offense be? Would Notre Dame have not keyed in on the run as much and made it a point to not let Georgia run? Would Beck have made better decisions? Who knows? Would Georgia's passing offense been more prolific? It was better than Notre Dame's when you compare it. And Riley Leonard was 15 for 24 for 90 yards. And that touchdown came on the one-play drive that was right before the end of the second quarter when Georgia turned the ball over. They score on the next play. Stockton 20 for 32. He threw it downfield a few times, 234 yards and a touchdown. no pick. That was Gunnar Stockton's statistical day. But then you look throughout the season, Alabama, the running game was a problem, the drops were a problem, and they got beat coaching. Against Kentucky, they ran all right, but drop passes in that game. I remember Dylan Bell dropping a pass that could have been a touchdown in that game. And I think it was in the third quarter during the Kentucky game. They didn't run the way you thought they would against Tennessee Tech. Obviously, Etienne had a pretty big run, but after that, it was Georgia's passing offense that did so well against Tennessee Tech. Defensively in the tackling, you saw that problem against Alabama. I thought you saw it a couple plays against Auburn. I thought you saw it against Mississippi State. Against Florida, turnovers were the problem. Against Texas, the run game was good. The pass game was a problem. There was always something going on for Georgia, and it never. What was Georgia's best game? What was the most complete game they played this year? You could argue it was week 1 and just the second half alone against Clemson. So it, to me, is honestly amazing when you think about what this team did, what this team went through and struggled with. It won the SEC championship, but what Klatt is saying about the norm for Georgia, that's true. And those things showed up against Notre Dame, and it's exactly why they lost. So a little bit of a reiteration of what we talked about on Riding Home on Bourbon Street, but wanted to get that out there for y'all. Thank you for watching. Newsletter below. This is every day. This doesn't stop. So don't go away just because it's the off season.